tournament special is we have live commentary for some of the matchups that are happening, and you're one of the commentators. Tell me what it's like to watch a game and call it live.
It's a very different feeling from sitting down playing the game yourself, because there's the pressure only on your end of the board really to try and choose the ideal move and control the board, and obviously you're trying to win all the time. But from the broadcast booth, you get to see two perspectives, something that's a little bit different. You get to see what both players are trying to do as they make strategic decisions to improve their own respective chances of winning the game. And part of the pressure of being a commentator is to make sure that we are able to gain insight into what both are trying to do. It's not always possible, but there's the pressure of seeing things from a different point of view on each move. So it's easy enough to think about heuristics in your own mind sitting on one end of the board, but when you are removed from it and it's more abstract, it's very difficult to separate the thought processes of both players and then also add that third-party perspective from the booth. So I think there's almost the same pressure, but for different reasons. It's still more pressure playing, obviously, in the tournament, but we want to be on our game as we are watching and make sure we provide the right call.
In your analysis, when you're watching this unfold, what do you look for? Do you look at the expressions of the players? Do you look at what's on the board?
Yeah, there's a mix, of course. The most important thing by far is what's already on the board and the letters in the players' racks, but they're also looking for body language from the other players, for any game history that they have with each other in terms of perhaps ambiguous decisions that their opponents have made in the past. There's textbook ways of looking at a position on the board and a standard computational or formulaic way of making a move, but there's also a human factor that's really hard for us in the booth in particular to see sometimes, because there's history between, for example, Mark Nyman and Nigel Richards, who have played 10 times this tournament. They have played Scrabble for nearly 30 years. So they have a lot of history going back in terms of what informs their decisions to making moves. To add context, I am 30 years old, so they've been playing about as long as I've been alive. So it's actually impressive and sometimes for us very difficult to understand every aspect of what they're thinking.
That's a good segue, because my next question is, has there been one match that you've watched and called that is particularly impressive or memorable for you?
There have been a lot of really good ones. I think it's still pretty hard to pick one specific one, but there's still a particular game in my mind. It was between Nigel and Mark on the top board, where there was some very unorthodox play that Nigel made. That's part of what makes him so great, is he doesn't always pick the move that all of us would expect, which is usually an excellent move, but then he finds one that's just out of this world once in a while that doesn't make sense until we look at it and analyze it on our own merit a little bit later, or perhaps a few minutes after he's made it. He made a setup at one point in the board that would be a standard one turn later he should take that spot that he's just set himself up for, but he decided to make himself a setup and then block another part of the board in his next turn so his opponent couldn't use it, and then he used his setup 2 turns later, which was a very, for us, unusual way of thinking about the game, and it actually ended up helping him win a game that he should not have won most of the time.
From your vantage, is there something about this tournament that makes it different from the others?
The biggest difference of this tournament by far is there are 45 rounds of play over just 5 days. So the first day we had 9 games. For 3 in a row we have had 10. And on the final day we have 6. So it's a grueling, almost a week long of play. Any other comparable tournament with the same number of days, there's maybe 6 or 7 games played in a day before you get some time to rest and have dinner and socialize. You still get time to do those things here too, of course, but there's just so many more games. The other thing that makes this tournament really different is they do what's called a King of the Hill format. So what that means is players can play each other up to 10 times, such as Mark and Nigel have, because they're allowed to repeat pairings against each other. There's another format that's called more of a Swiss pairing system, where you play each other based on the number of wins you have, but you also avoid repeats against each other until a certain round. But here, that doesn't happen. If you are both doing well, you will play each other, even if it's 10 times. So it's really brutal. You can't escape the people who are doing really well. I've been calling it a bloodbath most of the time, because it is. There's just no prisoners taken.
So when you watch this, you see these players play their opponents again and again. Do you see the toll on their faces?
It's psychologically exhausting, certainly, to be in that position, but part of what makes the very best players here do the best that they can is that they're not showing like you said, that fatigue, at least not in an obvious sense during the game. They're able to really, really well control their emotions, so keeping neutral expressions when they're doing well or when they're doing poorly. Either way, it's not so obvious what's happening because, like poker, there are tells. You know, if your body language suggests that you have bad letters or really good letters, then your opponent can capitalize on that information you're giving with your body. So there is that training to not show any signs of negative or positive things happening on your end of the board. It makes for an interesting experience, you know, with some people who are remain stoic even outside of games because they've gotten so used to being that way in the tournament environment.
Last question before I let you go back to work. Have any of the players come up to you asking for tips or your observations on someone that they're about to play?
I usually go over to board one to talk to the players after the game, or we run into each other in the hallway, and then they'll ask, hey, how do you think I played, or something like this, which is very humbling and flattering because many of them are far better than I am. But you know, part of the thing with being in the broadcast booth is when you're removed as a third person, it's a little bit easier to look objectively and not let the emotion of being at the board and playing in the game block your thinking. We can get into these sort of cognitive biases or blocks when we're sitting there, but it's a little bit easier when you're watching as a third party to see best moves or perhaps not so good moves and not have this in-game block happen as we sometimes have. So it's nice that they will ask, hey, did I miss anything, or what did you think of my game? But they're definitely the better players. It almost feels trivial when they ask sometimes, but yes, sometimes they do ask.